Hello guys, today we are going to talk about Dharoking or Dharoking, whichever you prefer. And then I don't mean Dharoking, but the combat training method that existed for several years. Dharoking was more than just a training method though. It's a former combat tradition with quite an interesting story behind it. But before we get to that, we should first try to create an image of what melee combat was like when Dharok Armor was released, because you know context always matters when talking about the game's past. So first of all, the combat system itself was very different at that time. Combat did not have any abilities yet, and it was really just an older version of what we now call legacy combat. That's also why special attacks were very important, as they were the only way to add or create some type of additional damage. Then if we look at the best melee armor available at that time, believe it or not, it was just Rune Armor or the Dragon Plate Legs. The only alternative was the Dragon Chain Body. As for the weapons, the best options were the Abyssal Whip that had been released in January of 2005, and the Dragon Weapons. So that's the poisoned version of the Dragon Dagger, the Dragon Longsword and the Dragon Scimitar. That was all for melee. On the 9th of May of 2005 then, the Barrows minigame was released and it introduced the Dharok melee armor to the game, which revolutionized combat. It was much stronger than any other type of armor, and also the Dharok Great Axe was much stronger than the next best alternative, which was the Abyssal Whip. Especially its special set effect of hitting higher at lower life points was just incredibly overpowered in comparison to the other special attacks that existed at that time. For that reason, the hype around Barrows for a big part became the hype around the Rocks, because everyone wanted to test how much they could hit with it. By the way, at that time the damage system worked differently. The highest number of life points that a player could have, or hit points if you prefer the older name, was 99 at that time, and for most people hitting over 30 was already great. The same applied when fighting monsters. Today we can hit several thousands of damage, but that's due to two updates that happened over the course of the years. First, in 2010, Jagex multiplied all damage by 10, so just add a 0, and then in 2012, as part of the release of the Evolution of Combat, the damage system was reworked so that everyone would hit higher and everything alive would have a higher number of life points. So just remember, back in 2005 and for the next 5 years, hitting 30 or 40 was really good if you weren't using Dharoks. I am aware that I still haven't explained yet what Dharoking actually is, so let's do that now. At that time, in 2005, there already existed this competition of people trying to hit as high as possible on monsters. The release of Dharok's armor only fueled that due to its special effect of inflicting more damage if you have a low number of life points, but Dharoking was about a lot more than that competition though. It actually became a legitimate way of training combat, primarily because at that time protection prayers still blocked 100% of all damage. So you could afford to have an extremely low number of life points as long as you had your protection prayer switched on, because you would always take 0 damage anyway. And that's what lies at the basis of Dharoking. It's not known how much more you would hit when losing a life point, but it was rumored to be around 1% more damage per lost life point, generating much more XP in the process as well, of course, which is what Dharoking was all about. So now that you understand the general concept of Dharoking, you still might have two questions. First of all, how did people reduce their life points for this? And secondly, where did they train? As for the first question, there were actually several ways to well hurt yourself. If you were ballsy enough, you didn't need anything special. You could just attack any strong monster and let it take down your life points until it was low enough, and that's when you switched your protection prayer on. Of course, that was quite risky, but there were safer ways too, and actually quite a few. Let's have a look at them. To begin, there were the lunar spells that heal other players in exchange or at a cost of losing 75% of your own life points. But of course you needed other players for that, so that wasn't ideal. Also, the lunar spellbook didn't exist yet in 2005, so that was not an option yet initially anyway. Another option was to build a throne room and an oubliette in your player-owned house. That's that trapdoor thingy. If you fall through the floor, whatever you land on continuously damages you until you get out of there, so that could work too, but two problems with that. First of all, construction didn't exist either until more than a year later in 2006, and it was also not very practical because you had to go back and forth between your own player-owned house and your combat training location. So to the rescue came a potion that had been released in 2003 as part of the dig site quest. The nitroglycerin potion, when dropped on the floor, reduced your life points by 25, so just drop a few of those and you're ready for using Dharok armor. This method has two advantages. One, the potion is portable, so there's no need to relocate. And two, you could easily get to just 1 life point if you use the potion once you were at 26, 51 or 76 life points. The nitroglycerin potion is what many people ended up using, although the dwarven cake became a good option as well when it was released in 2006 as part of the Recipe for Disaster quest. Okay, so then the second question, where to train? That's a good question because some of the important combat training locations didn't exist yet. For example, the Ancient Cavern was released in 2007 and the Chaos Tunnels were released in 2008. So yeah, where to train? Barrow's armor was extremely expensive at that time, so if you had it, then you absolutely did not want to die with it or risk dying with it, especially at a time when Death's Office didn't exist yet, when gravestones lasted just a few minutes, and when it took a lot longer to get back to your training area because not as many teleport options existed yet. There seemed to be two main strategies. One, you trained in a safe area, or two, you trained near a prayer altar. As for the safe areas, we're looking at minigames then. Back in RuneScape 2, the best choice would have been Pest Control, although that one was released in 2006. As for prayer altars, there was really only one good choice, and that was training in the Monkey Temple on Apatol with the Protect from Melee prayer switched on, which would block 100% of all damage at that time. People who hadn't completed Monkey Madness yet would often go to the experiments in Mauritania instead. There was no prayer altar there, but experiments were great too because they had a high number of life points. They were very weak to melee attacks and they weren't strong in general, so there was no risk of dying. So that was the alternative for those who hadn't done Monkey Madness. And then there were several other locations as well, but I think you get the point now, so it had to be safe either because the monsters weren't strong enough or because there was a prayer altar. So Dharoking, or training melee by using Dharok's armor, remained popular for a bit more than 5 years after its release. The main event that changed that was the release of the Evolution of Combat in 2012, which reduced the prayer protection rate from 100% to just 50%. However, by then, the Dharok melee method had already become much less popular due to the release of new armor and weaponry in the previous years. Barrows and the Dharok armor set definitely had a big impact on the game and the community, which is why the entire Dharok set still cost millions of GP years later. In the end, it's important to understand that Dharoking was a true combat tradition. So that was that. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, let me know in the comments. Also, this is the first video of my new video series about RuneScape traditions of the past. If you want more videos like this one, so more RuneScape traditions that no longer exist, then let me know and I will see what I can do. Before I go, a thumbs up would be appreciated if you like this video, and of course, thank you for watching. I am July, and I hope that you will come back for more.